Dear friends, welcome back to another episode of The Informant. In this video, we're going to tackle the persistent myth that nuclear powers are invincible in war. Why, despite countless historical examples, does this belief continue to linger? If you haven't already subscribed, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss a single update. Trust me, you'll want to stay tuned. When the topic of Russia's invasion of Ukraine comes up, some people continue to make bold claims as if they were absolute truths. One of the most common and mistaken claims is that a nuclear power like Russia simply cannot be defeated in war. But why, despite being proven false, does this myth keep resurfacing? Before diving deeper, it's crucial to dispel this misconception. And what better way to do that than by exploring well-known historical examples? In June 1950, North Korea's communist dictator Kim Il-sung launched a surprise attack on South Korea, backed by assurances of support from Stalin and Mao Zedong. North Korea nearly won the war within a matter of weeks. At that time, Stalin's Soviet Union had only tested its first atomic bomb the previous year, making the United States the world's sole fully developed nuclear power. Faced with the North Korean invasion, Washington had the option to use nuclear weapons, knowing full well that Stalin, an ally of the North Korean regime, would not be able to retaliate in kind. However, the United States chose to rely on conventional forces, pushing back the North Korean threat. By late 1950, as Allied forces approached China's borders, Mao Zedong intervened, sending a massive wave of 1 million Chinese troops into the fray. At this critical juncture, General Douglas MacArthur, a World War II hero and commander of Allied forces in Korea, urged President Truman to authorize the use of nuclear weapons against China. MacArthur even submitted a list of 30 Chinese cities he believed should be targeted to force China out of the war. Yet, despite knowing that the Soviet Union lacked a fully developed nuclear arsenal, President Truman not only rejected MacArthur's proposal, but also relieved him of command. The United States, still the only true nuclear power at the time, chose to accept a stalemate that continues to this day. Fast forward to 1972, President Nixon, facing immense public pressure, signed a ceasefire agreement with North Vietnam. He knew full well that the North Vietnamese would break the truce as soon as U.S. troops left the region, and that's exactly what happened. North Vietnam resumed its offensive against South Vietnam once the last American soldier departed. At the time, the Soviet Union and China were on the brink of war, with their relationship far from friendly. The United States understood that any use of nuclear weapons in North Vietnam could drive the Soviets and Chinese into opposing camps. Yet even with this knowledge, and despite North Vietnam's renewed aggression, the United States refrained from using nuclear weapons and accepted the fall of South Vietnam to the Communists just 2 years later. In 1979, it was China's turn. By then, a fully developed nuclear power, China launched an invasion of Vietnam, only to be defeated within a month of combat. The following decade saw another nuclear power, this time the Soviet Union, suffer a humiliating defeat in Afghanistan after nearly 10 years of brutal fighting. The Soviets knew that their loss in Afghanistan would have a devastating impact on both military and civilian morale. Even though nuclear weapons could have been used relatively safely in the mountainous terrain with minimal collateral damage, Moscow never resorted to using them. Instead, they accepted their defeat, a defeat that many believe hastened the collapse of the Soviet Union just 3 years later. In the 1990s, Russia once again faced defeat, this time at the hands of a separatist republic, the small mountainous Chechnya. In December 1994, taking advantage of a weakened central government in Moscow, Chechnya, a tiny country in the Caucasus, smaller than the U.S. state of Delaware, and home to only 1 million people at the time, launched a separatist war against the powerful Russian Federation, ultimately winning after a year and 8 months of grueling combat. Given that this conflict threatened Russia's territorial integrity and could have sparked similar separatist movements across the Russian Federation, Moscow had every reason to use nuclear weapons to prevent defeat. Yet, once again, Russia refused to employ nuclear weapons, accepting defeat and risking potential territorial fragmentation. These are classic examples of nuclear powers losing wars, shattering the myth that nations like Russia are immune to defeat simply because they possess nuclear weapons. So, why does this lie continue to spread? In the case of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, this myth is perpetuated largely by Russian propagandists or sources with a pro-Russia bias, who argue that Russia's nuclear arsenal will guarantee its victory over Ukraine. But as we've clearly seen, Russia didn't resort to nuclear weapons to prevent its defeat in a separatist war within its own territory, even when the risk of further separatist movements loomed large. If Russia didn't use nuclear weapons in Afghanistan, accepting a defeat that contributed to the collapse of the Soviet Union, and if it didn't use them in Chechnya, despite the threat to its own territorial integrity, we can reasonably conclude that Russia is unlikely to use nuclear weapons in Ukraine. Moscow knows that such an action would directly impact millions of people across Europe and NATO member states, potentially triggering NATO's direct involvement in the war on Ukraine's side. So the notion that nuclear powers don't lose wars is, at the end of the day, just a myth. And that means Russia, despite being a nuclear power, can indeed be defeated in war, just as it has been in the recent past. If you value independent journalism and want to support our work, consider buying us a coffee through the QR code on the screen. Your contribution is essential for us to continue bringing quality analysis and information. Stay tuned for more updates, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for the latest analyses and insights on the world's most urgent geopolitical issues.